Welcome to Cultivate, a Veritas Academy podcast, where we explore truth, beauty, and goodness through meaningful conversation. We invite you to join us in discussions meant to edify your mind, encourage your heart, and equip your family to live abundantly in Christ.
Welcome back to Cultivate. I'm your host, Fischer, and this summer we're between seasons 2 and 3 of Cultivate. We'll be launching season 3 very soon in September. But over this time of hiatus, we tried to pick a few podcasts that were back near the beginning in season 1. You can listen to season 1 and 2 online if you like. We'd certainly like you to. But we went back to the beginning to really find some important conversations that you might have missed, or you might enjoy just listening to them again. This conversation is actually the pilot episode of our podcast, and it's really about what is the point of school. Now, we're right now, some of you might already have started this school year. Here at Veritas, we're on the cusp of starting our school year. But you, as you're sending your kids to school, are not just sending them there to learn about reading, writing, and arithmetic. That never was the case. There's always something deeper that students are learning at a school. Always this underlying paideia, this culture that they're learning. Now, in the schools of our country now, maybe not a culture that really fits with some of our home cultures, but what that paideia does from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, in every break and in every class and in the lunchroom and everywhere that we go, it shapes and forms us into the people. And here at Veritas, we're trying to shape and form people into the image of Christ. So this is a conversation that we had back in May of 2022. It's a conversation with our Dean of Students, Graham Dennis, who's always interesting, and I think who loves Raisinets, which I think comes out in this podcast. But Graham is one of those people that's been really foundational to helping us make the kind of school that really has that paideia in place. So much more that we need to do, and we're still growing into it. But it's a great thing to think about as you're thinking about getting back to school this year. So we hope you enjoy this conversation. The mission of Veritas Academy is to cultivate loving, serving, thinking students. And we say that over and over again here at Veritas. I think almost every email that I write to our families here at school starts with our mission is to cultivate loving, serving, thinking students. But really what this podcast is focused on is that task of cultivating. It's a task that if you are a Christian parent, you're called to be not just a producer, but someone like a careful farmer, someone that cultivates and grows up young men and women to take their place in God's kingdom. So we're really excited about this, and I have the privilege of being here with Graham Dennis, our Dean of Students. Hi, Graham.
Hi, Ty.
Graham's going to be with me on many of the podcasts. I was joking with him earlier. I think that Graham and I, who've been working together now for 15 years, could probably do an endless podcast, right?
Yes, we could, Ty. Not that everyone would want to listen to it.
No one would want to listen to it, but we could just talk. Graham and I have the gift of gab, and we are interested in so many of the same things. So, but today we're going to talk about what this podcast is really about. So we open it up with this question: is what is the point of school? So if I put that in front of you, Graham, what do you think? How should parents think about what's the point of school?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we are required by law to send our children to school. It's interesting to think in the past that we culturally have always made a distinction between two kinds of education The kind of education that's relatively new is universal formal education, but there was always what you might call education or training for citizenship.
Yep.
What you need in order to survive or make it in whatever community you live in. And that education is kind of the bedrock and the foundation for the others. But here at Veritas, we are required to provide children with a formal education. The question is, what's the value of a formal education, but also what's the value of the particular kind of formal education that we provide? And so, briefly, I think it's important to distinguish, first of all, between different kinds of education. So there's education for citizenship, which really comes from church and family life. The school can, of course, participate in that as well. But there's formal education. And of course, parents have the opportunity to choose between a variety of kinds of formal education. So, what we'd have to communicate quickly is, well, what kind of formal education are we?
Yeah, and as a classical Christian school, when I think about the kind of education that we provide, it really is woven deeply back into that biblical concept of that Greek word paideia.
Right.
So in paideia, I mean, it's a strange sounding word. It's not a word that we use every day, but talk about what a paideia is.
Yeah, and paideia is the aim is as much as possible to mature people into the excellence or the fullness of their humanity. Mm-hmm. Of course, that occurs through a variety of kinds of experiences in our lives. But the intentional act of trying to do that is what we've thought of as education. Paideia, in our sense, in our culture, includes a variety of elements. Formal education is a really important part of that. What's unique about a Christian education is that we are including in what we understand the formal education of our students, we're including the religious or the Christian component. So we are requiring students as part of our school to not just know what we might call, facts, arithmetic, learn to use language well, to know history, but we also want them to have a Christian worldview. And we're going to introduce, of course, scripture, theology, and weave into our education Christian civilization and Christian concepts and Christian theology. So we're laying the groundwork for them to grow into complete and full human beings. For the Greeks, that would have not necessarily included the understanding that we as Christians have of what a full or complete person is. For instance, for the Greeks and the Romans, that might have included what they would call the cardinal virtues, the four cardinal virtues. But for a Christian, of course, we would include the three theological virtues.
So what you're saying is that there's not just one paideia out there. There are many paideias out there. There's a Spartan paideia and an Athenian paideia. There's a Roman paideia and a Hittite paideia.
That's right. And so everyone thinks we need to be, or at least every civilization has attempted to point their children towards a complete and full humanity. Of course, there's been a disagreement about what complete and full humanity is and how you get people there.
Yeah, but you see, today in America, our schools are secular, so there's no paideia, right?
Well, what's interesting, the change that's taken place in an odd way is we've removed Christianity from what we might call public education. We've removed the influence of Christianity in public education pretty significantly, almost entirely. But something has cropped up, which is the attempt to introduce what we might call secular paideia, a full-orbed vision for what a full and complete human being is. And I think what we're beginning as, Christian civilization to recognize is it's becoming an alternative to Christianity. It's presenting itself not just as, we're giving students formal education, but we're actually trying to form them into something.
So basically, even some like in the history of education in America, a lot of the schools would have borrowed a lot from that Christian paideia in the beginning.
Right.
But now I think what Christian parents are seeing is that for 8 hours a day, their kids are often faced with a very different paideia that is saying that full humanity is really about whatever the PC, the politically correct ideal of the day is. And just like if you were a young Spartan man and you said, I don't want to fight, I want to paint, they would say, like, it's not acceptable.
Not the ideal.
Not the ideal. So when Christian kids are saying, hey, I'm not for this or I'm not for that, what we're finding now is that we don't have a culture that says, we were always open-minded. We have now is a culture that's really putting the screws to them.
Yeah, and when we think about what paideia looks like for us, what it looks like is there's what we might call a formal education component that's required by the state. We're, giving our students hopefully a good formal education, but we're recognizing that it's really not possible to educate children without also in some way forming their souls and their character.
Yep.
And it's going to happen, even if it happens in a sense by removing things. If secular paideia says we're going to remove the influence of Christianity, that is itself a kind of paideia.
Right. It's we're going to form them around the donut of the missing God.
That's right.
So when we think about that paideia, when we think about for parents who are thinking about education, if there's a different, there are all these different competing paideias out here. What is the paideia of Veritas Academy and classical Christian education? And I want you to let's talk about that in the sense of what is it that we want to see with that young man or that young woman when they're graduating from our school?
Yeah, this is interesting because when we went through the process of trying to figure out how do we kind of have our mission statement or our vision for what we want students to be kind of simplified down into something memorable, we had a variety of options, and what we decided is loving, serving, thinking. That's an expression of what we think a full human being looks like. Mm-hmm. So what we're essentially saying is we're trying to cultivate loving, serving, thinking students. What we're really saying is if we have thinking students, but they're not loving and serving, they're malformed or they're incomplete. Or
right.
If we have, serving students who aren't thinking, or, so in terms of our mission, we're trying to do all three. We recognize in a way that our mission is explicitly directed towards formal education, mm-hmm. as it's required by the state. But as a Christian school, we have to think about what does it look like to create loving, serving, and thinking students.
Within that Christian context,
That's
right? So we're thinking about love, service, sacrifice, and thinking from that distinctively Christian worldview. But there are skills that we think about as well.
That's right.
As a classical school, we want them to know facts like we talk about in grammar. We want them to be critical thinkers. And we're going to have, in the Cultivate podcast, we're going to have one of our episodes on critical thinking. And we want them to be able to speak. We want them to be able to put ideas together in a persuasive way, because in a free society, we should not be forcing people to do things as much as persuading people to do
That's
things.
Right.
So when you and I talk a lot about students here at the school, and a lot of times, if you go back to Aristotle, he said man wants to be happy, right? So is that what we're trying to do? Are we trying to make happy Christian children here at Veritas?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ty. I obviously have to wrestle with my students on what.
By the way, we actually had a billboard once that said "Happy Christian Children."
Right.
I hated it, but we had a billboard that.
Yeah. So when you think about the word happiness, of course, there's a definitional problem. What does it mean to be happy? Of course, we want our children to be happy. The problem culturally is that happiness almost always has the connotation of something momentary. I feel happy. Well, I feel happy when I have Raisinets, for instance, especially dark chocolate Raisinets. I feel happy.
I don't share your paideia.
Right. So as those of you who know me well will always see coffee in my hand. Coffee makes me happy.
Yeah. You can actually track Graham around the school with empty coffee cups.
That's correct. Yeah. So, but obviously, that's a kind of a species of happiness that's pretty easy to achieve without having 7 hours of your day, 5 days a week, at a school like ours. So the investment obviously entails that happiness isn't something as simple as a cup of coffee or some candy. It's something more substantive, and we often as Christians use the word joy. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting question. Do we want happy children? If we mean by happy, the happiness, the momentary happiness you get from candy or whatnot, you might say, well, then why are we studying Latin? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Latin doesn't always make kids happy in that sense of the word.
Second year calculus doesn't
either.
That's
right, yeah. So, of course, what we're aiming at is joy. And the interesting thing about joy, the difference between joy and happiness, is joy can be attained even in the midst of struggle, difficulty, and sorrow. One can experience joy even in the midst of tragedy and loss. Mm-hmm. And, in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, there's actually a thing you can give people to make them happy, a drug called Soma. But obviously for Christians, we know that happiness can't simply be a drug that you give them. It has to be something that's cultivated, and we think it's cultivated through character formation.
Sure. So we believe that we can help students have the right kind of skills to be an 18-year-old that's prepared for the world, but we're much more interested in helping them begin to form the kind of character that's going to make them a happy 80-year-old rather than the peak of their life being at 18.
That's right.
Because a life well lived is not just an 18-year-old life. Sadly, some are taken from us when they're young, and what we're trying to do, what we're trying to invest in is something, we call the long game.
That's right.
We're gonna help you be a happy 80-year-old.
Right.
Sometimes we talk about this concept of rightly ordered loves. Could you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. So a very interesting, we could call it a classical idea that even the Greeks and Romans had, and of course Christian civilization presupposes, is that you can't really be free unless you can order your desires and you can order your passions. And that might include also restraint. Virtue entails rightly ordered desires and rightly ordered passions. And what we recognize as Christians, this is maybe where Christian civilization and Greco-Roman civilization overlaps, but differs profoundly from our own, is that that's work. Mm-hmm. It's hard work to order the passions. What we recognize as Christians is the problem of the fall, the role that sin plays in creating disordered passions, and the role that habit, grace, of course, the presence of the Spirit operative in our lives, and of course a healthy community plays in restraining and ordering passions. And those two elements are essential. One is to restrain our passions, and the other is to have them ordered and pointed at the right things.
Yeah. So if you say like, well, you love Raisinets, yeah. But if you
how many?
Yeah,
in one sitting.
How many? Or if it's your like your wife's birthday.
That's right.
And what you say is, honey, you know what I got us for this wonderful birthday meal? A 5-pound bag of Raisinets. You might be happy, but there's something malformed that I think your wife's going to help you understand.
My wife feels about Raisinets like you do. So
yeah, okay. Well, there you go. So I will remember once, and I won't use this football coach's name because I don't know if I've not researched. I don't know if it's true, but I guess there was a football coach that was asked to move from one team to another, and he really wanted to go. And his wife said, "Listen, it's either me. If you make this decision, I'm done with you." And he chose the team. Mm. When your career or your money or your even wife or family can be a misordered love.
Yeah.
Because we only function right when God is at that core of what we love.
Yeah, there's a really neat Latin phrase for this, the summum bonum, or the greatest good. And what we're trying to teach our students is to be able to understand, to rank order goods. So in that case, we could say that he chose the lesser good over the greater good. His marriage is the greater good, and coaching the particular football team is the lesser good. Or in the case of Raisinets, that would be the lesser good, and the greater good would be my wife's joy and happiness on her birthday.
Yeah. So one last thing, because it's maybe something that's a little bit different about a classical education. I was at a local public school, and I don't know if this story is true, but I know that one of the parents of that local public school, I was there to watch a play, and the play was in a beautiful facility, and the parent said, after 9th grade here, if you're really interested in drama, you don't have to take any classes outside of the dramatic arts building. And I smiled and tried to play it off. And in my heart, I'm thinking, grief, that's terrible, because, I wouldn't want a 10th, 11th, and 12th grader to only have drama, even if they're very gifted in that kind of field. So when we think about a classical Christian paideia, we're thinking about this balance of breadth and depth, right? Of capacity and ability, maybe. So talk a little bit about why we value, especially breadth, so much.
Yeah, I think one danger in our culture is there are a lot of tests, the aim of which is to figure out not just what you're good at, but what your career is going to be, and ultimately,
like disc tests and stuff like that.
That's right. Which box you fit into, and our students are desperately trying to figure out, what box do I fit into? What compartment do I fit into? What is my identity? So this is really an identity question.
Yep.
And what I think all of us realize, looking back on our lives, is we didn't actually know what we loved. We thought we knew what we loved, but we didn't know what we loved. A great example is, this is a challenge at dinner.
This is not going back to Raisinets.
No, yeah, right. The challenge at dinner, my mom had a rule that there were 2 items, we're not talking about like entree items, 2 individual items that we were exempt from eating, and we had to eat everything else. And mine was beets and cauliflower.
I was going to say 2 a night, or 2 like
total.
Okay.
So, and you weren't allowed to switch them up, but I happen to love beets and cauliflower now. But what was interesting about, the reason I'm mentioning this is, there were some things I really didn't like, and I thought I would never like. And a great example would be mushrooms. I thought mushrooms, God had sent mushrooms to the earth to torture people.
Right, and you in particular.
And me in particular. And now I can't imagine life without mushrooms. So one of the things that we're trying to do in terms of breadth is, a student doesn't know necessarily what he or she loves. It's oftentimes the case. We just had a really cool story about a student who won first place in the AMC math competition, and she would have thought of herself as not a good math student.
Well,
it's kind of a really cool story.
Yeah. So that breadth is something. We're going to have a podcast this season with Alyssa Choden about how to help students and help ourselves to have a broad listening diet.
That's right.
Because there are so many, God has made the world with so many good things in it that we need to learn. We need to keep an open mind to enjoying as much as we can.
And if you use the culinary analogy, I know some people struggle with certain tastes, but I feel very blessed that I have an incredibly full range of tastes that I love and enjoy. And how horrible would it be if it were only, mac and cheese and Raisinets?
Right. Yeah, it would be really horrible. But you had those two poor things, cauliflower and beets. Yeah. But eventually, you tried them.
Yeah.
Right. And now you like them.
I love borscht.
Wow. I know what to make for Sunday.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's borscht. And
only you and I will be eating it.
Yeah, that's probably true. So We're really excited about this season of Cultivate, and we're going to be unpacking many different areas. Graham will be with me sometimes. There'll be other guests that we'll get to know as well. But Graham, thank you. Thank you for going on this journey. I know how passionate you are about these things, so it's great when I can sit here and share things with you and not share Raisinets.
Thanks for the opportunity, Ty.
You've been listening to Cultivate, the podcast of Veritas Academy, a preschool through 12th grade classical Christian school in Leola, Pennsylvania. If you would like to learn more about Veritas, please visit veritasacademy.com to discover the truth, beauty, and goodness of classical Christian education.